You have to be very, very careful in believing what you see and read. In fact, the gentleman we just spoke to before about the trampolines, right? So, and I'm sorry, I can't
Richard
remember his name. Richard.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saying, and I didn't realise this in that story, that those stats that were presented were stats immediately following the opening of one of these mega air places or these big trampoline parks. Well, when I first saw that story, I thought that that was the ongoing stats. So even where there are stories that are correct, you've still got to be very wary of what you're reading and critical. Read critically as well about the information that you're seeing.
Well, what struck me again was that dozens of people obviously on this feed were lamenting the passing of Richie McCaw. And, you know, dozens and dozens were clearly believing it. One very cold fish said, just shows you can be a great flanker, but doesn't mean you're a good pilot. I was like, man.
Oh, my Lord, that's terrible.
Know. Wasn't it? I mean...
Well, people need to go to RNZ, don't they, straight away and have a look. And if it's not there, well, you've got to ask yourself.
Well, see, I couldn't possibly say that as self-promotional, but thank you, Ali. Richie McCaw's spokesperson was interviewed about this and said you can either fight it or you ignore it. And they've tried to track down the administrators of these sites in the past. They don't get anywhere, so they're choosing to ignore them. How depressing is that, though?
It's really challenging, though. I think this is the issue with the over-information that we're inundated with. And, you know, over the last year, I've kind of quit social media because of that, because there's just too much in your face and it's very, very hard to filter it all.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that's the big challenge that we and our kids will have to learn in terms of how do you sift through the massive piles of junk that we're presented with every second when very little of it is actually relevant to us. So it's a really big challenge. I just don't know what the answer is.
Well, we all need to learn some resilience to handle all of that.
Don't use that word.
Sorry. In the 2 minutes we've got left, let's just tip our hat to the Queen briefly. She may well be doing the unimaginable and handing over some power to Charles. Royal expert William Dampier is predicting Queen Elizabeth will turn to the Regency Acts, which would see her hand over power to Prince Charles in a couple of years when she turns 95. She would keep the title Queen, but Charles perform certain royal functions on behalf of the sovereign. Prince Philip would be guardian of the Queen, which is a bit of a curious and rather misogynistic title. But anyway, did you think you'd ever see the day?
No,
Would he be called king?
No, Charles, no, that wasn't reported. I did look for that and I couldn't see it, but she's still Queen and is still sovereign, so I don't think so. He would just be the doing the royal functions, which he's starting to do already anyway.
Yeah, sorry I interrupted you, Shamabeel. So
no, I just said I don't care.
Do you have a feeling? I mean,
not really. I think that it would. Anything like that's quite interesting. I think he would be keen to give it a go, though. If he didn't become king, do you think he would always be wondering what it would have been like?
Well, he's been waiting a very long time.
Yeah, and you're right. He does do a lot of stuff, and he's in the media a lot as well. So I wonder how much things would change for him. Would they change a great deal? And maybe he could then pass some of the duties along to what's that other one called? See, I follow them closely.
The next generation?
William,
and Harry.
Yep.
If they're not, squabbling which they supposedly are now. Interesting factoid, the last time the Regency Act was invoked was in 1810, around the madness of King George. I'm sure you'll remember that. Thank you, Shamabeel Yaqub and Ellie Jones, for talking with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, guys. We're coming up towards Checkpoint at 5 o'clock. It's been great. Thank you, guys, panel listeners, for having me the last few days. It's been fun. But, of course, Wallace Chapman will be back tomorrow. Time for a lie down for me. Mā te wā, Checkpoint and Lisa Owen is next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, a special investigation into big tobacco using Māori to target Māori on marae and beyond with cut-price e-cigarettes. Morally reprehensible, selling your people out, or simply sound business strategy? You decide. Postponed operations, overcrowded wards, a lack of surgeons. Is our kids' cardiac service in crisis? The government releases details of its proposed medicinal cannabis scheme, including who can grow, manufacture and prescribe. The deadline for the much-anticipated EQC inquiry is delayed, and a family of 3 lost in the bush overnight after a wrong turn are safe and well. Don't forget, you can check us out live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Doctors will need a specialist to sign off on cannabis prescriptions under the government's proposed medicinal cannabis scheme. The Ministry of Health has today published an extensive list of proposed regulations covering cultivation, licensing, manufacture and supply of cannabis products. It proposes that medicines approved by the ministry could be prescribed by a GP. Unapproved products, as long as they met set standards, would also require a specialist's recommendation. The Health Minister David Clark says it strikes the right balance.
The principle here is that medicinal cannabis products should be like other medicinal products. They are medicines and we need an appropriate sign-off.
David Clark is encouraging the public to have their say on the scheme over the next 4 weeks. A man is now facing a murder charge following the death of a 10-month-old Hokitika baby. The baby was airlifted to Christchurch Hospital in a critical condition yesterday and has since died. The 30-year-old man appeared in the Christchurch District Court this morning, charged with seriously injuring the baby. This afternoon, the police confirmed the baby had died and the man had been charged with murder. He was due to reappear in court this afternoon. This morning, he was granted interim name suppression and was denied bail. A big tobacco company is targeting Māori with its new e-cigarette. It's offering them free trials and discounts on the device. Guy Espina reports.
Philip Morris says its IQOS device heats tobacco rather than burning it, so reduces the harm of smoking by about 90%. New Zealand boss James Williams says Māori have the highest smoking rates, so the company is going to marae and rugby league clubs to market the product in what it calls community activations. But Shane Kawinata Bradbrook, a public health advocate for smoke-free Māori communities, says the Philip Morris tactics are appalling. He says IQOS is still addictive and harmful, and the Māori workers promoting the product for Philip Morris are selling their people out. This is Guy Espina.
17 workers at Sanford's Bluff fish processing factory have been made redundant as the company confirms it's downsizing its operation in the town. Workers have been under a cloud of uncertainty since the announcement last month that up to 30 jobs at the factory could go. Sanford is moving its whitefish operations to Timaru and has said there's potential for expansion of its salmon operations in Bluff in the future. But Bluff Community Board Chair Ray Fife says that's cold comfort for those laid off. He says work is not easy to come by in the town and 17 fewer incomes will be felt in the local community. The Centre for Māori Suicide Prevention says shocking suicide figures for Māori underline the need for a different approach. The Ministry of Health has released the provisional suicide figures for 2016, which show that 553 people died by suicide, the highest in a decade. The rate for Māori was twice that for non-Māori. The program lead for Te Ao, the Centre for Māori Suicide Prevention, Tio Sewell, says the figures are shocking but not surprising.
For Māori communities, carrying on doing the same approaches that we've been doing for the last is clearly not working for our people. So we need approaches and strategies that resonates with the realities and the histories of Māori communities.
Tio Sewell says he'd like to see the government move suicide prevention away from district health boards and allow local groups to take the lead. A family of 3, which spent a cold night in the bush near Wellington, appears to have left the track after mistakenly taking a route used by pest controllers. The 50-year-old man and his 2 daughters, aged 11 and 14, failed to return from a day walk in the East Harbour Regional Park yesterday, and a large-scale search was launched. Police Sergeant Hamish Knight says they were found today, kilometres away from their planned route.
So the park has a lot of bait lines in it, just for general pest control, and those bait lines are marked. And because those bait lines are well used by trappers, it's likely they'll think that was a track and have taken that track down to Golden Stream.
Hamish Knight says the trio have been checked by medical staff and are uninjured but were tired and hungry. Auckland councillors have voted in favour of progressing a plan to downsize Chamberlain Park Golf Course from an 18-hole to a 9-hole course. The Albert Eden Local Board has been pushing for the plan, which would also see 2 sports fields and other amenities built on the course. The proposal faced strong opposition from golfers, some of whom say it'll become an election issue. There's reason for optimism for the New Zealand cricket fans ahead of the second day of the rain-affected World Cup semi-final against India in Manchester. The Black Caps will resume tonight on 211 for 5, batting first, with 23 balls remaining in its innings. Teams batting first have won all 5 previous matches at Old Trafford this tournament, and former Black Caps bowler Ian O'Brien says the pitch is too paced.
It just makes it easier. There's a larger room for error for the bowlers. And New Zealand have bowled very, very well in the tournament and also used some of that bowling second to their advantage.
That's Ian O'Brien. It's 5:05. The All Black assistant Ian Foster is backing head coach Steve Hansen's handling of the questions surrounding Sevu Reece. Hansen has clarified comments he made about Reece, who has been picked for the All Blacks for the first time. The Fijian-born winger was charged with assaulting his partner last year before starring on the Crusaders' run to a 10th Super Rugby title. After saying in a radio interview domestic violence also involved women assaulting men, the All Blacks coach has released a statement saying in no way was he minimising how harmful domestic violence is for women. Foster believes Hansen has done well to not shy away from the questions the selection of Reece has raised.
We know people use us as a vehicle for a whole lot of things, but we've just got to make sure we front up on issues and deal with them, and I'm proud of the way Steve does that. If some things get misinterpreted and people see that, then our job's just to re-clarify that. Ian Foster. That's the news.
Clear questions on insurance.
Is the system broken? Have we got massive problems? The answer is no, we don't. And we should be providing a lot more confidence in our financial institutions than we do at the moment.
Unclear answers in the UK.
When his deadline for leaving the EU? He hasn't told us. He hasn't got the faintest idea. He's not going to
Thank you. Stop, please, Mr. Johnson. And choreographing a bird dance.
Whether it's a uniquely human response to music, and then this bird turned up on the internet and looking like he was actually moving to the beat.
News, interviews and the bird. Morning Report, 6 to 9 weekday mornings on air, online, on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, new research from Australian husband and wife scientists rewriting the origins of life as we know it and offering hope for treating disease. And after 10, Stolen Generations lawyer Antonio Butti tells the remarkable and moving story of one man's victory against the state. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Long fine spells and isolated showers tonight. Rain for a time overnight, then mainly fine tomorrow. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. A few showers turning to rain for a time this evening or overnight, becoming fine in Bay of Plenty and Wellington early tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Brief rain this evening or overnight, mainly fine tomorrow, but a few showers about the Tararua district. Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain about the ranges, mainly fine elsewhere, but a few spots of rain until tomorrow morning. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers with a few heavy falls, clearing Fiordland tomorrow morning and elsewhere later in the day. And Chatham Islands, mainly fine tonight, showers developing tomorrow. You're with RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tobacco giant Philip Morris is targeting Māori with its new e-cigarette, selling the device to them at half price and going to places with high Māori populations to promote it. Philip Morris says its IQOS device heats the tobacco rather than burning it and therefore contains around 90% fewer toxic compounds than cigarettes. But Māori smoke-free advocates say Philip Morris's tactics are appalling, and Māori working for the tobacco company here are selling their people out. Guyon Espiner has been investigating and he filed this report.
Being a single mum, having to look after and raise my children on my own, I just, as long as I had my cigarette and coffee, I managed.
Being a mum, being a working mum, what's my outlet? Serious smoking is my outlet. Keeps me sane, keeps me going.
First time I tried to give up, I was 25. I lasted 3 years, and then life happened. The second time I tried to give up, I was 33, and that lasted for 4 years. But then life happened again.
I can't afford to feel guilty. I can't afford to think about how much I waste in terms of money. I can't afford to think about the cancers that I potentially am going to get. One day at a time, and today has been good. So I'll reward myself.
About 37% of Māori women smoke. That's 3 times the level of the general population. But Maira Wakato believes she has the answer, a new product which she claims reduces the harm of smoking.
I feel it's important to me. It's an obligation as a former smoker who's switched to our new product that I need to share it. I need to share it with Māori women.
The catch is Maira works for Philip Morris, one of the biggest tobacco companies in the world. The product that Maira and Philip Morris are promoting to Māori is the IQOS. This is not a standard vaping device. IQOS is a hybrid between traditional cigarettes and e-cigarettes. It uses actual tobacco but heats the tobacco rather than burns it. Philip Morris claims that process reduces the harm of smoking by about 90%, although American and Australian experts spoken to for this investigation say the harm could eventually prove to be comparable to conventional cigarettes. Philip Morris is heavily targeting Māori groups in a bid to sell this IQOS device. It's running marketing campaigns. It calls them community activation. So it goes out to marae and places with high Māori populations like here at the Mangere East Rugby League Club. It comes here and promotes the IQOS device and offers discount deals. Philip Morris is selling the IQOS device to Māori groups for $50, half the normal price. As James Williams, the General Manager of Philip Morris in New Zealand, explains.
You know, we subsidise devices for certain groups, for sure.
Which groups?
We do a lot of community outreach with Māori, and there's a lot of, out-of-pocket issues, and there's some individuals, some smokers who don't have credit cards. So there's an inability to transact online. So we have to make sure that we engage them in the right way, and then we don't want to make pricing an inhibiting factor for them to make the move away from these products.
So in some circumstances for those Māori groups that you mentioned, you might halve the price of the
device. Yeah, so we'll subsidise the device for those groups.
Shane Kawinata Bradbrook is a long-term advocate for smoke-free Māori communities. He describes the Philip Morris tactics as appalling.
I think for Māori who are working on behalf of this industry, in my view, they're kupapa. They've sold themselves out and they're selling themselves really short for our community that has been in an addiction cycle for decades. And I think they should reflect on these sorts of, programs and ask themselves that question. Are you kupapa? Because that's what it looks like to me. You've sold your people out for some money.
We'll return to the Philip Morris sales pitch to Māori later on in the story. But first, what is the IQOS and is it safe?
Okay, so this is a science machine that shows what smoking does to your lungs versus what IQOS does to your lungs.
Gordon Otokolo is demonstrating the IQOS. He switched to it himself about 2 years ago. The claim of reduced harm is based on the idea that the tobacco is heated at about 300 degrees rather than burned at about 800 degrees. Philip Morris claims IQOS contains fewer toxic chemicals than cigarette smoke and the harm is reduced by about 90%.
No way. I can't really buy that. No, it's not 90% safer. It's not at all. The figures in our data clearly shows that it's not 90%. No way. I can't see that.
Dr. Sukhwinder Sohal is a researcher at the University of Tasmania. Sohal was the lead researcher in a study for the European Lung Journal, which said that the IQOS heat not burn product was no less toxic to human lung cells than ordinary cigarettes. IQOS and indeed all nicotine-based e-cigarettes are banned in Sohal's home country of Australia, and he's concerned they can be legally sold in New Zealand.
And that's very alarming. It took us like decades to understand the ill effects of traditional tobacco smoke. Do we want to start again? Do we want to wait for another decades and then say, oh yes, these were bad as well?
Philip Morris boss James Williams points to the work of the Federal Drug Administration, which authorised the IQOS for sale in the US in April.
They've reviewed upwards of 2.5 million pages of research and done their own independent verification. That's quite a robust system that's probably unparalleled in terms of the world's assessment of these products. That should give confidence to people that people have verified it and that these are a better product than the current product on the market.
But Shane Kawinata Bradbrook says that's a pretty low bar.
The bottom line is safer than what? I mean, you've got a difference here of either with tobacco products you jump off on 10th floor, or in this case maybe the 7th or 6th floor. There's still harm there. No matter which way they pitch it, there's still harm.
But Philip Morris claims IQOS is a world away from cigarettes, and it claims it wants out of that business altogether.
That's our vision in New Zealand to be one of the first markets. We hope to exit cigarette sales.
Why don't you just stop selling them now then?
Any premature move from us as a tobacco company in New Zealand is not going to change the industry unless I get our competitors to come along this journey with us as well.
In terms of motivation, though, you were saying, what is it, about 5,000 people a year die from smoking tobacco?
Yeah, I think that's common knowledge.
Wouldn't that be a pretty good motivation to stop selling them?
Massive motivation. That's what drives, I think, myself and all the 100 people that work for Philip Morris in New Zealand every day, that we want to make sure that we commercialise these smoke-free alternatives the right way and give people access to them and information on them. I don't want to sell any more cigarettes than I have to.
Philip Morris is happy with the New Zealand government's moves to take vaping mainstream. The government will soon introduce legislation to improve access to quality vaping and smokeless tobacco products, believing they could help New Zealand reach the goal of being smoke-free by 2025.
I had to wean off, so I'd have one cigarette and then I'd go to my vape. But after my packet was finished, I made that commitment because I'd gotten used to the vape, so it wasn't such a bad transition. Yeah.
How tough was it for you?
I was okay. I had started weaning myself off already, so cutting right back on my cigarettes. So I've had one since November 30th, one cigarette. I can't stand the smell. I can't stand being around people that smoke cigarettes because it just smells like yuck.
A cabinet paper claims that there is a scientific consensus that vaping is significantly less harmful than smoking, and that there's no evidence that it will encourage young people to take up smoking. And currently, there are no safety standards for the products. The new law will allow for those to be introduced and put vaping and smokeless tobacco products on a similar footing to cigarettes as to where they can be used and how they can be advertised. But Shane Kawinata Bradbrook says New Zealand is just getting suckered into Big Tobacco's new plan.
You're still dealing with a product that's designed to addict people. This is the same industry that turned around decades ago and brought out a new product called light and mild cigarettes. And where did that lead? Who's actually telling you that? Who's telling you the story that it's safer, less harmful? It's the same people who lied about second-hand smoke. Same people who lied about what they were putting in there. The same people who said there were benefits in light and mild cigarettes.
While Philip Morris claims IQOS is 90% safer than cigarettes, it doesn't deny the product is addictive.
People still want nicotine. Smokers still want nicotine. So we're not saying this product's not addictive. And I know it's hard for people to understand, but I just implore you to speak to smokers and say, would you want to smoke without nicotine? And they'd say no. There's a need for people to consume nicotine.
That need for nicotine seems to be highest among Māori populations in New Zealand, and Philip Morris certainly knows its market. Two of these community activations, as the tobacco company calls them, marketing drives really, were held here at the Māngere East Rugby League Club, and the process doesn't end there.
We were continuously following up our consumers, making sure that the product's okay, that the stock is available.
So quite a few people from the Māngere Rugby League Club, you reckon, are using the IQOS now?
Yes, definitely, and I know that because I do the hypercare. I'm the one part of a team who follow up our consumers to see how they're tracking with their journey on the IQOS.
Philip Morris offers a free 2-week trial and also gives a $30 product voucher to ICOS users who refer others to the device. That's available to all current smokers aged over 18.
I think as a company we should be across other groups as well, not just targeting Māori and Pacific, but of course they're the highest percentage of smokers, so we should, but it's open to all community groups. It's because I'm Māori, I connected to Māori, so it's turned out this way just because of I'm starting with my own backyard, I guess I'd say.
And Philip Morris says it's now on the path to help smokers reduce the harm to their health, and that as a company, they've turned over a new leaf.
The history of the industry is not something we'd be all proud of. But what I can be very proud of is that for the last 15 to 20 years, we've invested a lot of money, and I believe we're transforming the industry. And we want to be as transparent as possible on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and be responsible so that people hopefully over time can start to trust us and hopefully the tobacco industry if they do follow our lead.
Are you asking us to trust the tobacco industry now?
I ask you not to trust us now, because I know trust needs to be earned. All I ask for people to do is to focus on the facts rather than the ideology, rather than the emotion of the issue.
That's too much of an ask for Shane Kawinata Bradbrook.
If you're now going to sit here in 2019 and now say, let's believe these guys, I wouldn't. Because most of these products that will come in, it takes a long period of time before you actually see the results. And the harm, etc., then starts coming through, clearly evidence-based. But to believe them right now, I wouldn't believe them. Not in a million years.
Shane Kawinata Bradbrook ending that report from Guy on Espin. I'm really interested to know what you think of that. Is this Philip Morris doing a service to Māori smokers by helping them convert to this e-cigarette that they're marketing? Or is it a cynical move to tap into the addicted market where there is a high percentage of Māori? So it's a business plan. Let me know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's 22 after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. The future of medicinal cannabis in New Zealand is beginning to come into focus, with more details released today about how the scheme could operate. The Health Ministry has published a list of proposed regulations for public feedback, including who'll be allowed to cultivate, manufacture and prescribe the drug. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Rebecca Ryder, who suffers from chronic pain, is a vocal cannabis campaigner. For months, she's been helping Health Ministry officials draw up the framework for a countrywide medicinal cannabis scheme.
I have to pinch myself because my job for the last few years has just been to criticise the Ministry of Health, and now they're actually listening to me and have me on their advisory committee.
Ms Ryder is one of 12 people, doctors, researchers, industry reps among them, advising the Ministry on the best way forward. She's pleased with the progress, but isn't over the moon with where officials have landed.
There's still a lot of work to do. I think patients are going to have really mixed feelings about some of the proposals.
Here's what the Ministry has come up with. For the most part, patients would require both a GP and a specialist to prescribe a cannabis product, which would itself have to meet a set of quality standards.
It doesn't make any sense. Cannabis is safer than most prescription medicines. You can die of an overdose, the side effects are minor. And then the ministry is proposing to actually make it harder to get than an opioid prescription.
If the Health Ministry approves a medicine, like it's done with Sativex, then it wouldn't need that specialist sign-off. The proposed regulations are extensive, covering cultivation, licensing, manufacturing and supply. The products that get the green light include oils, ointments, tablets, patches and, yes, dried cannabis. Not for smoking, but for vaping. And that has National's Michael Woodhouse alarmed.
That's an extraordinary development in the context of our Smoke-Free 2025 policy, that they would allow a medicinal product to be inhaled into the lung.
Michael Woodhouse says the regime looks loose and the process sloppy, with the government leaving officials to make decisions rather than MPs.
This is absolutely crazy from a policy perspective. Ultimately, it is Parliament that decides what policies should be put in place, not officials. And yet this government has abdicated that responsibility.
But the Health Minister, David Clark, rejects that.
Yes, the opposition seem to be of a mind that politicians should decide these things, not clinical experts. And with all due respect, I disagree.
The Drug Foundation is relatively happy with where the dice have fallen, but its director, Ross Bell, says there are still questions about whether doctors will actually prescribe the medicines and how much they'll cost.
If it remains that these medicines stay expensive, then patients will continue to do what they're doing now, which is to access illegal cannabis, and that opens them up to a whole lot of risks.
The Health Minister says in time, Pharmac could potentially subsidise some medicinal cannabis products. The public now has 4 weeks to have its say, with regulations to be finalised by the end of the year. All in train, the scheme should be operational by the end of March 2020. Atu iti whare parimata, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
The deadline for the government's much-anticipated inquiry into EQC has been pushed back. The inquiry into EQC kicked off this year, led by Dame Sylvia Cartwright, which aims to look at how EQC responded to the Canterbury earthquakes, the Kaikoura earthquake and other disasters such as the Edgecombe floods. You've heard dozens of stories on Checkpoint over the years from people who have struggled dealing with the Commission. An interim report was expected in June and a final report to government by the end of the year. But the interim report's due date has been pushed back to Christmas, and the final report deadline is now March next year. Our South Island reporter Logan Church sat down with Dame Sylvia a short time ago in Christchurch to find out exactly why.
It was always optimistic because, for various reasons, I couldn't start until the end of November last year, and so June was thought to be very, very optimistic. So the Minister and I discussed it at the time of launching the inquiry, and we agreed that once I had got underway, I would come back to her with realistic dates if I was unable to prepare for an interim report to the Governor-General and to her by June.
So what are those realistic dates?
Realistically, I'm looking at a draft report before Christmas. By draft report, I mean one that can be circulated, or parts of it can be circulated to various parties to the inquiry, those who have particular interest or who I want to get feedback from to make sure I'm on the right track. That draft will be pretty much in its final form, but then once there's time for people to comment, then we need another month or so to complete the report and prepare it for delivery.
And you're expecting the new delivery date to be in March next year?
Yes, I have a 31st of March date because that seemed to me to be the most realistic. I'm hoping, of course, to achieve it sooner than that. I would very much like to have the whole report out by Christmas, but the volume of information that I've been receiving, the number of public forums and meeting with individuals, and the submissions and the formal interviews I've done have been much bigger than I really anticipated.
So essentially there has been a far larger uptake than you initially expected.
Yes, well, we were a bit on unknown territory, to be quite frank with you. Obviously thousands of people in Christchurch have been affected by these events, and so we weren't quite sure how many would come to talk to me. But I also have to allow for the fact that my inquiry is not based just on the Christchurch sequence of events, but also up into Kaikoura, up to Eketahuna, and as far away as Edgecombe, where they had massive floods. So I've moved north steadily to talk to the public in all of those areas as well.
Given the relatively wide scope, which you have just mentioned, and the large volume of people that you have seen, why not put more realistic deadlines out there from the outset?
Well,
because I mean, in some ways, some people might see this as a delay.
Well, it's possible they would, yes, but no one starting an inquiry has much of an idea about how much information will come to that inquiry. It could be very brief, or it could be that it takes much longer than anyone ever guessed, because you don't know the scope really, until you get started.
What are you hearing at these meetings? What are some of the common stories?
Yes, well, I think I could summarise by saying that EQC has suffered significant reputational damage. It was very much a body that people trusted and relied on, but when the massive Christchurch events got underway, especially from the beginning of 2011, when the second major earthquake occurred, it found itself in an area that it had never experienced before, and there was so much planning to be done, so many houses to be reviewed, assessed, so many people without adequate housing, that it was more than this small Crown entity was prepared for.
If I'm to sum up what you just said earlier, that as this got underway, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's not something that you expected. With that in mind, do you anticipate further date pushbacks, so to speak?
No,
or is
I
this
don't.
it?
Yes, I just have to meet that date. I'm well aware of the responsibility that I have, and I will meet that date.
And that was Dame Sylvia Cartwright talking to our South Island reporter Logan Church. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, why parents believe the country's cardiac service for children is in crisis. Cody dieback fears see tracks closed indefinitely in the Bay of Islands. And after 6, Auckland councillors vote to proceed with a contentious plan to downsize Chamberlain Park Golf Course. Do you really need 18 holes? We'd love your feedback on that. Also on Philip Morris and its e-cigarette marketing campaign. And do get in touch about the medicinal cannabis proposal that's been released today as well. Do you think it's going to make the product cheaper and more accessible for people? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can always email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The tobacco company Philip Morris is targeting Māori with its new e-cigarette, offering free trials and discounts. The company says the device reduces the harm of smoking by about 90%. But a public health advocate says Philip Morris's tactics are appalling and the e-cigarette is still addictive and harmful. A specialist will need to sign off on GPs' prescriptions for cannabis under the government's proposed medicinal cannabis scheme. The Ministry of Health has today published an extensive list of proposed regulations covering cultivation, licensing, manufacture and supply. The Health Minister David Clark says cannabis products should be treated like other medicines, and this strikes the right balance. A man has appeared in the Christchurch District Court charged with the murder of a 10-month-old baby in Hokitika. The baby was airlifted to Christchurch Hospital in a critical condition yesterday, but has since died. The 30-year-old man originally appeared in court this morning charged with seriously injuring the baby. The charge has been upgraded to murder. There's a call for a different approach to suicide prevention for Māori in the face of latest figures showing the rate for Māori is double that for non-Māori. The program lead for Te Ao, the Centre for Māori Suicide Prevention, says the figures are shocking but not surprising. He says he'd like to see the government move suicide prevention away from district health boards and allow local groups to take the lead. Sandford's Bluff fish processing factory has laid off 17 workers as the company confirms it's downsizing its operation in the town. Workers have been under a cloud of uncertainty since the announcement last month that up to 30 jobs at the factory could go. Sandford is moving its whitefish operations to Timaru with expansion plans, but Bluff's mayor says that's cold comfort in a town where jobs are hard to come by. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just checking in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for business now. Madison Reedy's joined me in the studio. Let me just move my cuppa so I can see what we're talking about, Maddie. So a botch up by Inland Revenue means that some BNZ customers are left owing money.
Some 45,000 of them possibly. So we actually got some calls recently from some BNZ customers. They contacted us and said oddly that their BNZ investments were missing from their Inland Revenue tax statements. That obviously made our ears prick up. So because typically a statement should have a list of all of one person's investments, including things like term deposits that people can have with banks, also their savings there, and the amount of interest that they would have earned from any of those investments, being them possibly shares and dividends and the like. So what it should detail in a tax statement is the amount of either resident withholding tax, income tax, all of the taxes combined that you are then meant to pay. So BNZ actually did send this information to Inland Revenue, but there was about 45,000 people's information that was sent to Inland Revenue wasn't actually processed correctly by Inland Revenue. They've said that it was a human error and that it has resulted in obviously incorrect tax bills being calculated. We don't necessarily have a solid figure on how much is owing, and Inland Revenue says it's going to work with these affected BNZ customers.
So basically the taxwoman or taxman is now paying catch-up and coming after those people in the nicest possible way to pay tax on assets.
A surprise tax payment that they didn't know they would have had otherwise.
Eek, that's going to make some people very unhappy. Let's move on to Bendon. Now, they're having a bit of a tough time, the company. Eric Watson, we can't rely on him to bail them out.
No, not this time around. So Bendon's holding company is called the Naked Brand Group. Now, that's actually, interestingly, it's an Australian-based company, but it is actually listed on Wall Street's NASDAQ, which is the tech-heavy exchange in the United States. Now, it announced to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the authority in the United States, that it's actually looking to sell some of its brands. So it's hired an Australian-based firm to consider some interest that it's received in buying some of its more successful lingerie brands. Some of those brands might include Bendon being the obvious one, also Heidi Klum Intimates, Pleasure State, Davenport, Hickory and Lovable. To any men listening, I'm sorry, you probably don't know what any of those are, but it's bras and lingerie, sometimes swimwear and sleepwear too. Now, Bendon has 33 stores in New Zealand. It actually has a total of 400 staff here, including a warehouse facility out by Auckland Airport in South Auckland too. It actually does generate most of its revenue in this country, despite being listed on the likes of the NASDAQ. But the Naked Group is in quite the financial rut and facing a tumultuous time at the moment for a number of reasons. In the financial year ended in January this year, it had a net loss of $49.2 million. That was off the back of a previous annual loss of about $37.5 million. It needs to raise money immediately. Its liabilities exceed its assets by $19 million, but it is trying and in discussions with its bank to increase and extend its debt facility, but that might be a little bit tricky because it actually did breach its banking rules and covenants with its bank over the past year. And interestingly, coming back to Eric Watson, obviously we know that he was a previously majority shareholder of Bendon and the Naked Group, but they've said that they can no longer rely on Eric Watson's Cullen Group for financing because he is facing what they say financial difficulty. Now, one could guess that is because he's been loaded with a $112 million tax bill from the High Court in March, which found that he was liable to pay that for some historical, what they call tax avoidance. And interestingly, on top of all that too, the Naked Group is facing being dumped completely from the NASDAQ exchange. Now, the NASDAQ has warned that its shares are trading too low and they're too cheap, and they could become something as to what they call a penny stock, and basically it's too cheap to be on the exchange, and they have probably about 6 weeks to rectify that.
Wow, grim all round. Okay, let's take a skip through the markets.
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up 0.5% tonight. That had a rise of 112 points to close at 10,650. Huge numbers we're seeing there. The New Zealand dollar is buying at just under 66 US cents tonight, 95.3 to the Aussie and 53 British pence.
Thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with our business update. Parents of children with severe heart conditions have written to the Health Minister telling him the country's Pediatric cardiac service is in crisis. They say their kids' open heart surgeries are often delayed, in some cases up to 8 times, because there aren't enough surgeons, beds or resources. With a growing waiting list and growing population, they fear the system can't cope. Michelle Cook has the story.
On the 6th of November 2018, my son's cardiologist from Starship said to me, "I'll be honest, our surgery list is in crisis mode." And then he said something about the two being down to only 2 surgeons instead of 3, and those 2 surgeons being, I can't remember whether he said exhausted or burnt out, but he said something that made me worry about whether or not they were getting enough rest and breaks, and worry about my son having surgery, open heart surgery.
Michelle Burns was so concerned about what the cardiologist told her, she wrote down his exact words. The Palmerston North mum is one of 4 Heart Kids parents who have written to the Health Minister David Clark expressing their fears about an underfunded system that they say is stretched to capacity. They and a further 60 parents say Starship, which is the only hospital in the country where open heart surgery on children is performed, has been under pressure for years. They're worried about constant delays, overcrowded wards, not enough paediatric intensive care beds, and the fact for the past 2 years there have been only 2 surgeons for the entire population, when in the past there were 3.
I feel like we've gotten to this point because more and more heart children have lived, and there's a bigger population of heart children, and then they haven't planned for the expansion of the service as population grows, or the heart kids population grows. And then I feel like it's going to go backwards, like children are going to be dying because there's not timely service.
Michelle's son Mitchell has been in the system since the day he was born, and like most children with congenital heart conditions, that's likely to be the case for the rest of his life. He had surgery at 5 days old, 3 months old, and was scheduled to have surgery last October. The 4-year-old was so unwell he couldn't move his body weight without puffing and could no longer go to daycare.
My son was using a pushchair, like as if it was a wheelchair, when he was like 3.5, 4 years old. And he wouldn't even walk from the lounge to his bedroom without asking me to come with him, and then halfway down the hallway he'd ask me to pick him up and carry him to his bedroom.
Michelle says Mitchell was the right weight for surgery, and with his health declining, needed it desperately.
Me and my mum and my husband had all booked annual leave for the surgery, and then they ring and say that it's been rescheduled, and then they ring again and say it's been rescheduled, and then the third time they ring to say it's been rescheduled, they say, well, actually, the date you got given in October, and then November, and then later in November, actually now we're just not even going to give you another date this year, we're looking at February.
She wasn't having a bar of that and immediately wrote a letter to Starship saying Mitchell urgently needed surgery. That prompted a fly-in visit to Auckland, assessments and surgery several days later. But Michelle and other parents say they shouldn't have to fight for their children to get timely treatment, and say it wasn't like this 4, 6 or 8 years ago.
My name is Melanie Walsh, and I'm parent to a child with complex congenital heart defects.
Some parents say their child's surgery has been delayed 5 times, and Melanie Walsh, who penned the letter on behalf of the other parents, says she knows of one child whose surgery has been put off 8 times before it finally went ahead. She says a major contributing factor is a lack of PICU beds.
The main problem is that unit services the whole of New Zealand, so if an acute case comes in, a child is desperately sick, or it could be any kind of surgery, or a cancer patient, then open heart surgery, which can be deemed elective even though it's necessary, can be pushed off that list to take the acute case.
The Auckland District Health Board says since 2016 the number of beds has increased from 17 to 22, and it's looking at further expanding bed capacity. But Melanie says New Zealand's heart kids can't wait for increased capacity. They need it now. She is in touch with families all over the country and says many children are waiting too long for treatment, and for some, their health deteriorates with each day that passes.
It's really stressful for everybody. And the kids, if they're older, if they're not little babies, they know what they're going in there for. So they have to prepare themselves mentally, and the parents have to support them So, it's putting a lot of stress on families that are already worried about what's going to happen in the surgery.
The Auckland DHB says there are currently about 55 to 65 children on the surgery waitlist, up from 40 to 50 children in previous years. It says that's due to, quote, intensive care unit and surgical capacity. No one was available for an interview, but in a statement the DHB says surgeries have needed to be rescheduled at times, which means some patients may not receive surgery as promptly as they, their families or the DHB would like. Decisions were always informed by clinical need. It confirms one of 2 cardiac paediatric surgeons is leaving next month, leaving just 1 permanent surgeon. However, the DHB says locum surgeons will fill in until a new surgeon starts in December. In the statement, Starship Director Surgical, Dr. John Becker, says,
recruitment to our paediatric cardiac surgery team is well underway. We've had some excellent applicants and anticipate having a full team of 3 permanent surgeons soon. In the meantime, I want to assure families that we are fortunate to have excellent specialist surgeons assisting us on a temporary basis. We review our cardiac waiting list daily to ensure that patients with the greatest clinical need are prioritised and that all our patients are receiving safe care in a clinically appropriate timeframe.
Melanie and other parents say the Starship staff are wonderful, but it's a lack of funding which is the crux of the issue. They're appealing to the Health Minister for more money to provide more beds and more surgeons to help New Zealand kids, including Melanie's son Patrick, who is likely to need further surgery in the next few years.
Is that surgeon going to be working a double shift before they do my kid's surgery? Is there going to be anyone available to do what he needs done in a timely fashion? The surgeons in there are great, but they can't work 24 hours a day, and if there aren't enough of them.
Are you scared?
Yes, I'm scared.
Are other parents scared?
Yeah, they are pretty petrified, which is why it's come to us wanting to know, where is the future proofing for our children, because they're going to be in the system for their whole lives.
And that piece from Michelle Cook, if you're just listening, you can go back online. It'll be put up there later this evening and also on our Facebook page. Now, the Health Minister, David Clark, declined to be interviewed, but said in a statement that from time to time, any hospital procedure can be delayed for reasons outside a hospital's control. He says he wants to acknowledge the anxieties and concerns any parent has when their child is seriously unwell. And he appreciates the time and effort these Heart Kids families have taken to write. And the Health Minister says he'll be responding to them directly. The invitation for the Health Minister to come on the program still stands. Let's go to some of your feedback now on our earlier story, Guyon Espina's investigation into Philip Morris's marketing campaign around e-cigarettes. They are targeting, and acknowledge they are targeting Māori smokers. This from Stuart in Otago. It's very difficult to quit smoking when you continue to associate with smokers. That's why Philip Morris target Māori. It's the whānau thing. Mike says, Philip Morris, they are smart, but it is all BS. The evidence will come in 20 years, and by then it will be too late. And this one, regarding your Philip Morris story, I suggest we trust Philip Morris to care about customers' physical health about as much as we trust Facebook to care about users' mental health. I think we've got time for one more. This person says, Guyon does not understand harm reduction by the sounds. Harm reduction is completely valid and is a logical step before abstinence. These Māori who are anti-it are ignorant on such matters. Do keep your feedback coming on that story. Also, would love to hear from you on the medicinal cannabis proposal, which is out today from the government. Now, a family of 3 lost in the bush overnight after apparently taking a wrong turn have been found after an 18-hour search. The 50-year-old man and his 2 daughters, aged 11 and 14, were found just after 10 o'clock this morning, tired and hungry, but in good spirits. About 50 people, including dog teams, were involved in the search of the regional park, which is about 10 kilometres southeast of Lower Hutt City. Hamish Cardwell was in Wainuiamata and filed this report.
Back with Mum safe and well. That's the welcome outcome after a father and his 2 daughters spent a cold and soggy night in the bush in a regional park near Wellington overnight. The trio had set out on what should have been about a 3-hour walk. Police Sergeant Hamish Knight says he suspects they left the track after mistakenly taking a route marked and used by pest controllers. He says they ended up kilometres away from where they should have been, surrounded in dense bush with no cell service.
You're looking at quite a few kilometres really, about 5k I'd say, south from probably the last known point in which we believe that they indicated they were. So the park has a lot of bait lines in it, just for general pest control, and those bait lines are marked, and because those bait lines are well used by trappers, it's likely they'll think that was a track and have taken that track down to Golden Stream.
A resident of Lees Grove, the road where the family entered the bush, says children play up the track all the time, and it isn't thought of as a dangerous place to go.
They used to say to me, well, didn't it worry us? As long as they came back, safe and sound, didn't bother me at all. All I know is they just go up there and go up over the hill and, and then come back. Like I say, sometimes they came back down this way, but more times than none they went around the other way.
Dozens of searchers scoured the East Harbour Regional Park overnight and were pulled out at about 6 o'clock this morning to regroup. They headed out at about 10 o'clock again, and the family were found shortly afterwards. Hamish Knight says the family huddled together for warmth last night, continuing their journey once the sun was up, and crossed paths with rescuers as they made their way out from the Ko-Fi track. He says the trio have been checked by medical staff and were uninjured, although they were tired and hungry, but were still in good spirits.
They're just glad to be home with Mum. I'm sure they're going to have to get some nice warm clothes on, some dry clothes, and have a nice feed.
The family had intended for it to be a short hike from Wainuiomata to Days Bay, a roughly 7-kilometre journey. Hamish Knight says the family were well prepared for a day tramp and did all the right things when they found themselves in trouble, managing to follow a stream and walk themselves out. And he has a message for those planning on heading into the bush, even if it's just into forest near a city.
Tell people your intentions, what you're planning to do, taking the right equipment with you for that particular track, getting a bit of local knowledge of the area so you're not going in and just guessing, checking the weather, what that's going to do.
Police say they'd like to thank the land search and rescue volunteers who assisted in the search and the community for their support. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell aho.
And Hamish's report there will be on our webpage if you'd like to check out the pictures there. Ross Perot, the Texan billionaire and 2-time US presidential candidate, has died at the age of 89. Always a political maverick, Mr. Perot's 1992 campaign grabbed 19% of the popular vote, costing President H.W. Bush a second term in the White House and forcing Bill Clinton to back off big spending promises. Linda So reports.
Ross Perot, the feisty, self-made Texas billionaire who shook up American politics twice running for president as an independent, has died after a battle with leukemia. He was 89. His family says he died early Tuesday at his home in Dallas, surrounded by family.
I have lived the American dream.
The son of a cotton broker, Perot made his fortune as a groundbreaking entrepreneur in the computer data processing industry. But he was best known for his 2 presidential runs in the 1990s that struck a chord with disgruntled voters.
I gotta say one more thing.
The folksy independent and master salesman quickly found support among Americans turned off by the Republican and Democratic parties.
I want all the children.
His outsider campaign, mostly financed with his own money, advocated for cutting the national debt and fighting trade deals such as NAFTA. Perot finished with a respectable 19% of the vote in 1992 when Democrat Bill Clinton beat out incumbent George H.W. Bush. For his 1996 White House run, Perot started the Reform Party but captured little more than 8% of the popular vote. Perot is also known for using his fortune on behalf of POWs and U.S. soldiers missing in action. Perot is survived by his wife and 5 children.
Linda So with that report, and exciting times ahead. An improved weather forecast for Manchester looks set to give the Black Caps a chance to keep their dream alive at the Cricket World Cup. After being halted with almost half of the match completed overnight, New Zealand's semi-final against India is scheduled to continue later tonight. The Black Caps will have almost 4 overs to add to their total of 211 for 5 before trying to restrict a strong Indian batting lineup and advance to their second straight World Cup final. Sports reporter Clay Wilson is holding on to the hope and the dream too, and he joins me now.
Come on, Lisa.
First off, the weather. What are we expecting? Are we all go?
Yeah, good news, cricket fans. Much more promising for tonight than last night. Reports I'm hearing that there's actually been no rain in Manchester at all overnight. I've been checking on the UK Met office, which is, of course, the equivalent of our Met service here. They're saying a 5 to 10% chance of rain around the start time, which is 10:30 UK time, and that's going to stay steady at around 10% throughout the afternoon. Temperatures of around 19 to 20 degrees expected, so looking good to get the game completed tonight.
All right, so given where the match is placed, what approach are you anticipating from the Black Caps?
Well, 23 balls left for New Zealand in their innings, and they'll probably be trying to get upwards of 250, which doesn't sound like a lot in the modern game, but on this wicket could be quite competitive. It's not going to be easy to do that. Indian bowlers are very good, and this pitch has proved quite slow and not so easy to hit big shots on, but you've got 2 genuine batsmen at the crease, Ross Taylor, Tom Latham. Still got Mitchell Santner to come, and he can certainly bat. With the ball, they might be hoping that there's a bit of cloud around and Trent Boult can get the ball to swing. If they can do that, then they might be in. They'll need to attack. They're not going to restrict this Indian batting lineup to under 250. They need to bowl them all out. The likes of Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli. Sharma's got 5 centuries at this tournament. Kohli, the best batsman in the world at this format for a long time now. So the likes of Boult, Mitchell Santner is going to be key. The wicket has been turning a little bit. So the way he bowls as well could also prove important for New Zealand.
And what else do we need for this to go right for us and to go through to the final?
Well, the other bowlers need to support the likes of Boult and Santner. We've got Lockie Ferguson coming back, the speedster. His pace and also his ability to change the pace has been quite important throughout this tournament. And the two all-rounders, Jimmy Neesham, Colin de Grandhomme, they've proved a little bit expensive at times in the past. If they can keep it tight. And then the other thing is the fielding. New Zealand's always been renowned for their fielding, and that's been the same throughout this tournament. It could take a great catch, a brilliant run out that might just create the difference. It could be 15 to 20 runs they save in the field, and what will be a really close game might just get them through.
So you'll be up until what, 2 o'clock in the morning, Clay?
Yeah, or later.
That is Clay Wilson, our sports reporter. The big game starts at 9:30 tonight, New Zealand time, and RNZ will be live blogging all the action on our website, rnz.co.nz. Now, fears over the spread of Cody dieback have prompted the permanent closure of 10 walking tracks in the Bay of Islands. The Department of Conservation today announced that 7 tracks in the Puketi Forest, 2 tracks in the Russell-Nairotonga Forest, and 1 in the Oamahuta Forest will close. Docks Bay of Islands Operations Manager Martin Ackroyd told our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, that the decision to close the tracks wasn't made lightly.
The main situations are sort of the high carry dieback risk with keeping those tracks open. The ones we closed had quite low visitor use, and also the high upgrade and ongoing maintenance costs. There's plenty of other recreational opportunities in Karri Forest available around here.
And were they relatively well-frequented tracks?
No, the 7 tracks in Puketi were mainly the backcountry adventurer visitor group, so not, quite low visitor numbers.
So what's the value in closing them then? If this isn't actually where people are going, shouldn't DOC be looking at closing ones where the risk is much higher?
We've mitigated the high use tracks to prevent the spread of Karri dieback, so where these ones haven't been mitigated.
What is the current situation with Cody dieback in the Bay of Islands? Do we know how widespread it is and what the risk is?
We have 1 confirmed site in Oamahuta at the old HQ beside the road there. That's the only confirmed site that we are aware of.
So these are mainly precautions, these track closures?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, that's the last thing we want to do is have the disease spread into any of the other forests.
How concerned are you about that spread, though?
We're very concerned. that's why we've taken this step to close down the mitigated tracks.
Are the closures indefinite at this stage?
Yeah, the tracks are permanent at this stage, and we'll assess opening those up on a case-by-case basis if necessary.
But you can't foresee that happening before definitely the end of the year, say?
No, I wouldn't think so, no.
And how is it going to be policed, these track closures? Are there obvious ways to deter people?
We'll have signage in place. We'll also have rangers monitoring the sites.
And that is the Department of Conservation spokesman Martin Ackroyd speaking to Nita Blake Person there. Just before we go to the news, some more feedback from you on Philip Morris's marketing campaign for e-cigarettes, marketing to Māori. This person, Steve, says Philip Morris has brilliant marketing, truly impressive. However, Māoridom has been the target of enough European spin. Shame on Philip Morris, says Steve. And Scott from Dunedin has also been in touch and says there's a term for someone who sells drugs the way that Philip Morris does. Pusher, says Scott. This person says vaping is cool until you see Google grape lung. Check it out.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The National Party is accusing the government of passing the buck on medicinal cannabis by leaving it to officials to sort out the details. The Ministry of Health has today published proposed regulations covering cultivation, licensing, manufacture and supply of cannabis products. The public now has 4 weeks to give feedback, with the rules to be finalised by the end of the year. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse says the process is sloppy.
This is absolutely crazy from a policy perspective. Ultimately, it is Parliament that decides what policies should be put in place, not officials. And yet this government has abdicated that responsibility.
Michael Woodhouse says he's also alarmed that under the proposed regulations the drug will be allowed to be vaped as medicine. The tobacco company Philip Morris is targeting Māori with its new e-cigarette. Its New Zealand General Manager James Williams says Māori have the highest smoking rates, so the company will sell its IQOS device at half price at places such as marae and rugby league clubs. Philip Morris says the device heats the tobacco rather than burns it, so reduces the harm of smoking by about 90%, although some specialists believe the harm could be comparable to conventional cigarettes. A public health advocate for smoke-free Māori communities, Shane Kawenata Bradbrook, says the company's tactics are appalling.
You're still dealing with a product that's designed to addict people. So this is the same industry that turned around decades ago and brought out a new product called light and mild cigarettes. And where did that lead?
Shane Kawenata Bradbrook. A man has appeared in the Christchurch District Court charged with the murder of a 10-month-old baby in Hokitika. The baby was airlifted to Christchurch Hospital in a critical condition yesterday, but has since died. The 30-year-old man originally appeared in court this morning, charged with seriously injuring the baby. The charge has been upgraded to murder. The man cried during his appearance by video link this afternoon. He was granted interim name suppression. Bail was opposed and he was remanded in custody. He'll appear again in the High Court in Greymouth on July 30th. 17 workers at Sandford's Bluff fish processing factory have been made redundant as the company confirms it's downsizing its operation in the town. Last month, workers were told up to 30 jobs could go. Sandford is moving its white fish operations to Timaru and has said there's potential for expansion of its salmon operations in Bluff in the future. But Bluff Community Board Chair Ray Fife says that's cold comfort for those laid off.
17 incomes that are no longer going in the community, and Sanford have said they're committed to expanding the salmon farming side of it, but that's still 2, 3, 4 years away. So in the meantime, it's a struggle for those workers.
Ray Fife says work is not easy to come by in the town and 17 fewer incomes will be felt in the local economy. The Commerce Commission says a large fine handed down to a car dealer for misleading documents and ads should act as a wake-up call to all used car dealers. Two Cheap Cars has been fined almost $450,000 after earlier admitting 10 charges under the Fair Trading Act. The Commission's chair, Anna Rawlings, says the company seriously breached the rights of about 20,000 people over 3 years when it asked them to waive warranty rights.
It's unlawful to contract out of the Consumer Guarantees Act, and those consumers retained their rights despite signing the waiver. The Commission was concerned that many people would have assumed that they had no remedy if they had an issue with the car that they purchased, and that just isn't the case.
Anna Rawlings says if those customers have had car trouble, they should consider going back to Two Cheap Cars to discuss the problem. The Australian government has pledged to hold a referendum on changing the constitution to recognise the rights of Aboriginal people. It says the vote will be held within the next 3 years. Aboriginal people have inhabited Australia for more than 50,000 years, but since European settlement in the 18th century, their status as the country's first inhabitants has not been formally recognised. In 2017, Indigenous leaders called on the government to establish an advisory board to represent them in Parliament. Watercare says forecast rain in Auckland over the next 2 weeks will do little to ease a water shortage. Earlier this month, the company put out a plea to people to cut back on water use to help ease the pressure. Met Service is forecasting rain over the next fortnight and normal winter weather through August. But Watercare's Rosalind Klein says Auckland needs about 3 times the normal amount of winter rain to make up for the shortfall caused by a very dry year. She says people need to keep conserving water. It's 5 minutes past 6. Former Black Caps bowler Ian O'Brien believes New Zealand's taken the safe but smart option in its Cricket World Cup semi-final against India. Batting first in Manchester, the Black Caps made their way to 211 for 5 before rain halted play on the 47th over. O'Brien says the pitch is a tough one to bat on.
Do we go all out and look for 300 and get bowled out for 170? Or do we go, look, let's just get what we can get, and if we can give ourselves some time at the end, we might be able to push through to 240, 250, and we back our bowlers who have done superbly well through the tournament.
Ian O'Brien. The semi-final is scheduled to resume at 9:30 tonight, weather permitting, with 23 balls remaining in New Zealand's innings before India's chase. The big three in men's tennis return to the court at Wimbledon tonight for the quarterfinals. Novak Djokovic, Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal are all expected to continue their run, with Federer having perhaps the biggest challenge in Japanese 8th seed Kei Nishikori. Djokovic plays David Goffin while Nadal plays Sam Querrey. And the New South Wales Rugby League team has to overcome a dismal record in deciders if it's to claim back-to-back State of Origin series titles tonight. The Blues have won just 4 Origin deciders compared to Queensland's 13. Queensland coach Kevin Walters says they're not daunted about playing in Sydney.
We'll play the Origin in the desert, doesn't matter. I mean, it's coming down here is going to be a wonderful opportunity for everyone to really showcase their skills and how good they can be at this level and will be.
Kevin Walters. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the oncologist Edmund Ang on the dreaded C word and how to treat cancer patients with compassion. Murray Lynch is on a mission to get a Kiwi playwright to Scotland. The Eagle has left the mothership in this week's edition of the Apollo story, 13 Minutes to the Moon. And John Bishop on his enduring fascination with the American South. He's just back from another visit to the birthplace of the blues on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Long fine spells and isolated showers today. Rain for a time overnight, then mainly fine tomorrow. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. A few showers turning to rain for a time this evening or overnight. Becoming fine in Bay of Plenty and Wellington early tomorrow. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairirapa, brief rain this evening or overnight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but a few showers about the Tararua district. Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain about the ranges, mainly fine elsewhere, but a few spots of rain until tomorrow morning. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers with a few heavy falls clearing Fiordland tomorrow morning and elsewhere later in the day. Chatham Islands, mainly fine tonight, showers developing tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. More details are emerging of what a legal medicinal cannabis scheme could look like in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health has published an extensive list of proposed regulations covering cultivation, licensing, manufacture and supply. Under the proposal, most medicinal cannabis products would need a specialist's recommendation before a doctor could prescribe them. Only medicines approved by the ministry, like Sativex, would not require that specialist to sign off. The Health Minister, David Clark, told our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, that it strikes the right balance.
I mean, the principle here is that medicinal cannabis products should be like other medicinal products. They are medicines, and we need an appropriate sign-off. Where they're approved and their effects are understood, that should be done at a general practice level. Where they are less well understood or not proven, then that does require specialist oversight.
Is it right that it be stricter, though, than for, say, opioid products?
Well, these are the kinds of things we're testing with this consultation. This documentation goes out and we expect to receive feedback from exporters, from clinicians and from users, and that will give us a picture of what the best set of regulations might look like.
The Nats have criticised that process. They say that it's the wrong way round, getting officials to do the work rather than the MPs. I politely and respectfully disagree with that. I think it's better that we have the medical experts and those who would develop the products having input into the process and developing the right regulations. I actually don't think one or two MPs are the expert on medicines, and it sounds in National's case a little bit like sour grapes. Looks like dried plants are still on the table in terms of vaping it anyway. Are you comfortable with inhalation as a way of consuming this medicine?
I rely on the expert advice of clinicians. That's really not a call for me as Health Minister to make. I'm comfortable if the expert clinicians are comfortable. I note that people take asthma medication by inhalation. There are forms and methods of delivery. Some are safer than others, and ultimately that comes down to a medical expert's decision.
One of the concerns that patients or users have had is the cost of these products. They're quite prohibitive in many cases. Is the government looking at ways of bringing those costs down?
Part of the purpose of this supply scheme that we're setting up is to ensure that there is a greater supply of these products over time. That will inevitably bring the price down. In the longer term, as more evidence mounts around how effective some of these products are, it might be something that Pharmac has a look at for supporting as well. But at this stage, the evidence is growing. It's a fast-changing market, and it's important that New Zealanders and New Zealand exporters also have the opportunity to grow and develop these products.
That's the Health Minister, David Clark. Auckland councillors today voted in favour of progressing a contentious plan to downsize Chamberlain Park Golf Course from 18 holes to 9 holes. The Albert Eden Local Board has been pushing for the development, which will also see 2 sports fields and other amenities built on the course. It's faced strong opposition from golfers who say it'll destroy a precious local amenity in Western Springs. And mayoral hopeful John Tamahere and his number 2, Christine Fletcher, evidently smell votes. Matthew Tunison reports.
What started as a spat between golfers and the local board has become a major political tussle in Auckland, with the powerful Environment and Community Committee spending much of its day debating the park's future. Councillors voted 13-7 in favour of commencing a detailed business case, which will cost ratepayers some $1 million. The development itself, should it go ahead, will cost close to $30 million. Councillor Christine Fletcher, who's in election mode as JT's running mate, made one of the more impassioned speeches of the day.
This is morally wrong to even consider this. It's morally wrong to even think of throwing more officer money at more consultants, more reports and everything else when we know that it has a very high level of failure likely.
Councillor Kathy Casey found it interesting that so many of her colleagues, including Ms Fletcher, had spent so much time criticising how the issue's been turned political.
The politics of this decision is certainly not coming from this ward councillor. On the other hand, I did open the Herald to find that a wannabe mayor and his wannabe deputy mayor made their launch of their campaign Chamberlain Park. Enough said.
The Albert Eden Local Board chairperson, Peter Haynes, said the area's had one of the largest population rises in recent years, yet it lacks sports fields. He said local sports clubs were absolutely desperate for more space to play and train and were having to travel further afield. Every conceivable option had been explored, from upgrading existing sports fields to building new ones elsewhere, and the Chamberlain Park development was the only viable option.
To say there's no urgency, to suggest that there are easy solutions is really it's to misrepresent reality. And the people who are politically opposed to widening the uses of Chamberlain Park know this because they've been there. And if they continue to support this idea, they should reflect on the integrity of doing that.
He said Chamberlain Park had become a political football.
What concerns me is that there is a lot of stuff here that's misleading at best, if not downright dishonest, and people are supporting that who ought to know better.
On the other hand, Jeff Seneschal from the group Save Chamberlain Park said a report the councillors were relying on was misleading.
The plan uses misleading information to imply demand for golf is shrinking in Albert Eden area, but no one from council has surveyed the users of the course. We have. It also conveniently ignores the numbers are up 20% at Chamberlain Park in the 2019 year to March.
Speaking after the meeting, Mr Seneschal told RNZ he'd be making sure Chamberlain Park stays on the agenda throughout the Auckland election, welcoming John Tamahere and Christine Fletcher getting behind his group's cause. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunis and TNA.
It's almost 6:15. Let us know what you think about that. 18 holes at Chamberlain Park, or should it go down in size to accommodate other amenities? You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Conservative rivals Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt have clashed on Brexit and UK relations with Donald Trump in a lively and occasionally bad-tempered TV debate. Mr Hunt accused his rival of not being willing to put his neck on the line by saying he would quit as PM if he did not hit the October 31st Brexit deadline. Mr Johnson said he admired his rival's ability to change his mind so often, a dig at the fact Mr Hunt voted Remain. The BBC's political editor Laura Koonsberg reports.
Out in front in the race and first in the door tonight. Then next, the man in second, vying to take charge. At a time when conflicts and controversy follows politicians everywhere. First, with the familiar introductions, the Brexiteer-in-chief.
We can either continue with the same old failed can-kicking approach, destroying trust in politics, sapping business confidence, or else we can change, get back our mojo.
Mr Hunt suggested a wider appeal.
Poll after poll, I'm the public's preferred choice for Prime Minister, because I appeal not just to those who already vote Conservative, but those we need to win. And to those watching at home, I'll be your Prime Minister, whoever you vote for.
No surprise, the hardest question first.
I voted Conservative much of my life, but now I support the Brexit Party and I'd like to see Nigel Farage in number 10. Can you promise me that we will definitely leave the EU on October the 31st?
I think it's absolutely vital that we come out on October the 31st. Otherwise, Tony, we will continue to hemorrhage trust, not just in the Conservative Party or indeed the Labour Party, but in politics generally.
If you don't get us out of the EU by the 31st of October, will you resign?
We're going to come out on October the 31st. And I think anybody who goes into this negotiation proposing yet again to kick the can down the road will, I think, run the risk of forfeiting trust with the electorate.
I think it's a no. And what we've got is someone who says it's do or die for the country.
I'm sorry. I think what we have with
I asked you if you'd resign, Boris.
What I have with my opponent is somebody
will you resign if you don't deliver it, yes or no?
My opponent is clearly not committed to coming out of the EU on October the 31st.
No, I just wanted to ask if you'd resign if you don't deliver it.
They faced questions on the risk they say they'd take, leaving without a deal, but joined battle over who's in the real world.
Being Prime Minister is about telling people what they need to hear, not just what they want to hear. And the difference between you and me is you are peddling optimism, and I'm saying we can make a tremendous...
bit of optimism,
Boris,
frankly.
why don't you... We can make...
I think only a defeatist and somebody who actually was on the other side of the argument for so long and somebody who didn't wish to, in fact, to come out would take that line.
Raise your hand if you feel confident telling the British people that we will have left the EU by the 31st of October.
Well, that's the spirit, Jeremy.
There we are.
Come on,
one to do it. I'll make it happen.
You're going to fool me.
Yet 2 weeks today, one of them will be our next Prime Minister. The shouting tonight is over. The decision not yet done.
Laura Koonsberg reporting. Let's go south now. The date to make all of Christchurch chlorine-free has been pushed back again. The Christchurch City Council wanted to have chlorine out of the city's water supply by this month. It was put in last year after it was discovered that much of the city's water infrastructure was not up to scratch, and some wells were at risk of contamination during flooding. The chlorine was originally supposed to be all out by May this year, but that then turned into July, and now the council doesn't expect the city to be chlorine-free before the end of September. 68 wellheads have been upgraded so far, with work underway or scheduled to start on a further 61. The council's head of Three Waters and Waste, Helen Beaumont, explained the delay to our South Island reporter Logan Church.
We're progressing with our wellhead improvement program. We've got 2 zones across the city completely free of chlorine. We've got another 2 that will come completely free by the end of by the end of this week, and then by the end of July a further 2. So what that means is that there are 2 remaining zones where we will still need to use some chlorine through July, and we'd hoped that we wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, because the chlorine was supposed to be out of everywhere by July, wasn't it?
It was. It was certainly meant to be out everywhere except when we had a high or an unusual demand. So except where we had perhaps some equipment failure where we had to go back to one of our chlorinated pump stations, or if we had a fire or something like that gave a spike in demand for us.
I see. But for some zones, the chlorine will have to continue for now.
Yes, indeed.
Yep. And what zones are those?
So the central zone, which is a good proportion of the city, so it's about 40% of the city in fact, so around the central city and then running south down to the Port Hills and those Port Hills suburbs, Cashmere, Huntsbury, along there.
And a number of unexpected delays are causing this. What are those delays?
So we've had a number of delays. Asbestos in some of our pump station buildings has caused some delays. That's been at the main pumps building down in Beckenham and also at the Averill Pumps building. And one of the problems with the asbestos, of course, is that we've got to do a careful evaluation of the site and then a full removal and then an inspection. So that tends to take sort of 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how much there is. So that's caused a bit of a delay. We've also encountered more problems than we expected with poor ground conditions. The problem with those sorts of delays is not only does it delay getting that well upgraded and that pump station free, but it tends to have a knock-on effect and slow the crew down from going on to the next pump station. So it all sort of compounds on us.
It all sort of cascades and pushes it out further.
It does.
Okay. Do you think some Christchurch residents might be a little bit frustrated at this? I mean, I guess just every few months it seems like that deadline of having all the chlorine out gets pushed just a little bit further back.
Certainly, I can understand that a number of people would be frustrated, and particularly people in the central zone, where most of the delays have been, and where we've had the most challenges right from the beginning. So people out in Brooklands, of course, will be very happy. They've had no chlorine for quite some time. Similarly, in the Ferrymead Littleton zone, so that feeds across into Littleton, Governors Bay, they will be very pleased. But yes, people in the central zone and in the southwest of the city, I can understand they would be frustrated in that we have had a timetable and we've had to set that back.
And that's the head of Three Waters and Waste, Helen Beaumont, who was talking to our South Island reporter Logan Church. Sir David Attenborough, perhaps the world's oldest environmentalist at 93, has told British politicians they can't be radical enough in dealing with the threat of climate change. He warned a parliamentary committee that it is essential to stick to a new target to decarbonise the economy or risk social unrest and mass migration if climate change is not tackled in time. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Sir David Attenborough got straight to the point when asked about the threat climate change presents and what Britain could do.
We cannot be radical enough in dealing with the issues that faces at the moment.
He warned that the climate is changing in a way that cannot be reversed down the track.
I'm okay, for the next decade. I'm okay, and all of us here are okay, because we won't face the problems that are coming. But the problems in another 20, 30 years are really major problems that are going to cause great social unrest. And great changes in the way that we live, in what we eat and how we live and so on. That's going to happen.
He says the reality of plastic pollution in oceans around the world has finally hit home.
Well, the plastic issue is a very interesting one. In that I've been going on about plastics for 20 years because it is anybody who swims knows that, and anybody who travels actually as far as can see the horrors of what plastic pollution can do.
He says the debate about climate change should be worked out and analysed in a public forum. He singled out Australia for how the debate is conducted here.
I am sorry that there are people who are in power and internationally, notably, of course, the United States, but also in Australia, which is extraordinary, actually, because Australia is already facing having to deal with some of the most extreme manifestations of climate change. Both Australia and America, those voices are clearly heard. And one hopes that the electorate will actually respond to those.
Sir David Attenborough says he draws hope from young people who clearly understand the threats of climate change and are ready to have their voices heard.
The most encouraging thing that I see, of course, is that the electors of tomorrow are already making that to themselves, their voices very, very clear.
That report from Rachel Mealy in London. It's a car that began its life as part of Adolf Hitler's vision for world domination and spread to every corner of the globe, becoming one of the world's most recognisable objects. Now the German-made and designed Volkswagen Beetle is reaching the end of the road. The distinctive vehicle is finally going out of production this week. The ABC's Nick Grimm looks back on a motoring legend.
It all started 80 years ago, and in a world of tremendous technological change, the Volkswagen Beetle has long stood out as a reassuring constant, seemingly little touched by the passage of time.
If you owned an 8-year-old Volkswagen and had it washed every now and then, who would know it's an 8-year-old Volkswagen? Except you.
But it was also a car that revolutionised motoring, almost from the moment in 1938 when it was the inspiration of a fascist dictator who wanted to mobilise the masses.
It shall be named the KDF wagon. Our technical designers and labourers can be proud to build such cars. May the German spirit be big enough to use them.
It was conceived, it was the idea of course, Hitler that wanted a people's car.
That's motoring journalist Daniel Gardner from Which Car, speaking about what's arguably the world's most recognisable automobile.
The good news was that he succeeded in that. In many ways, it set a benchmark for many, many other cars, the modern car of today, and it was accessible to many people. It was affordable and easy to live with, and people responded in the correct way. They bought millions and millions of the Beetle.
And while the leader of Nazi Germany might have set the wheels in motion for the Beetle, others can be credited for its ongoing momentum.
A nicer, more savoury personality to associate with it is Ferdinand Porsche. We all know what he went on to do. He was the pioneer and the engineer behind the Beetle, and he was hugely successful in making it an accessible car to millions. In fact, 21.5 million over its lifespan.
Leaving its Nazi origins in its rearview mirror, the Beetle went on to become the symbol of Germany's post-war economic renaissance and return to prosperity. But just as the car's engineering evolved over the decades, so did its personality, becoming movie star Herbie the Love Bug in Hollywood.
The little car takes first and third place.
And then blissing out with America's counterculture hippie movement in the 60s and 70s.
Hi there. The 1970 Volkswagen has something new. This, a bigger, longer-lasting engine. How long will it last? Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
This week, the final VW Beetle will roll off the production line at Volkswagen's last plant manufacturing the people's car, located in Mexico. Ultimately, the little car that for so long seemed impervious to change just couldn't keep up as motoring has kept on evolving. Daniel Gardner again.
The simple answer is sales. Over the course of its, as you say, 8 decades, it's not such a loved model anymore, and the Beetle has come to an end. There is a deeper answer, though, and it's related to Volkswagen's emissions scandal, unfortunately. I know this is something Volkswagen want to put under the carpet and forget about, but during that scandal, it was clear that they needed to change their focus, and that is looking at far more environmentally friendly solutions. One of those, of course, is electrification. That costs a lot of money to go into those sort of projects, and they had to start culling things that were, frankly, somewhat of a folly, and the Beetle is somewhat of a folly.
But for die-hard Beetle owners, the good news is classic models are set to see their values accelerate.
Yes, if you have one of these, there is question that they will start going through the roof. Now you can't buy one. There is perhaps no other more recognisable model in the automotive arena than the Volkswagen Beetle. It still has a massive following. Yes, it goes out of production today, but it won't be forgotten.
This is air. Air is for breathing and for cooling car engines. Air won't freeze up. Air won't boil over. Ask any Volkswagen.
And that was Nick Grimm with that report. Just before we go, a lot of feedback tonight on Philip Morris and their marketing campaign of e-cigarettes to Māori. This person says Philip Morris should be prepared to publicly state and sign that if it's safe, they will pay out reparation to the New Zealand government to cover health costs. I don't even 1% trust the company, who are getting rich fast. Check out Guyon's piece online. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse is criticising the government's medicinal cannabis process as sloppy. Philip Morris is selling its new e-cigarette at half price to Māori and marae and rugby league clubs, but a public health advocate describes these tactics as appalling. A man has appeared in the Christchurch District Court charged with the murder of a 10-month-old baby in Hokitika. And the UN Special Rapporteur investigating the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has called on the CIA to declassify its intelligence on the killing. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
But I'll tell you what, this crowd is absolutely electric, and I can't imagine what the Black Caps batsmen are feeling right now out on the pitch.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
At the moment, 30% of New Zealanders qualify as obese.